Right speech, right action, the Kamma you can't escape. Right speech and right action are the first two virtue factors on the path. Both are based on the principle of non-affliction, developed through right resolve, in that they involve abstaining from specific types of behavior that cause harm. Because these two path factors parallel each other in many ways, they are best discussed together. The suttas provide general definitions for and a few specific examples of right and wrong speech and action. The Vinaya also contains training rules covering most of the types of behavior that these factors abstain from, which it discusses in great detail. Our discussion here will draw from all these sources. Right speech. Right speech is defined as abstaining from four types of wrong speech: lies, divisive tale-bearing, harsh speech, and idle chatter. Lies are statements that intentionally misstate the facts of a case. The Vinaya's discussion of its training rule against lying shows that the intention defining a lie here is not so much the intention to deceive as it is the intention to misrepresent the truth. The distinction is a fine one, but it's important. In AN 4.183, the Buddha states that there are cases where a truth should not be told if it gives rise to passion, aversion, and delusion in the speaker. This does not mean, however, that you can misstate the facts of the case in such instances. It simply means that you need not tell the whole truth about an issue. You avoid speaking about the facts that would provoke harm, even if this would cause your listener to misunderstand the situation. And 473 provides an example relevant to this principle. To maintain your integrity, you speak as little as possible of your own good points and of the faults of other people. Of the four types of wrong speech, the telling of lies is the only one that has a corresponding precept in the 5 lay precepts. This means that it's the only aspect of wrong speech that is absolutely to be avoided in all situations. As AN 10.165 says, one should not tell a lie for one's own sake, for the sake of another, or for any reward. Of the various forms of wrong speech and wrong action, the Buddha regarded the telling of lies as the most serious and most destructive, perhaps because if you cause your listeners to misunderstand the truth, it can cause them to act unskillfully not only in this lifetime, but also in future ones as well. Furthermore, as he said in Iti 25, if a person feels no shame at telling a lie, there is no evil that that person will not do. This is a principle with far-ranging implications. Even a seemingly sober attempt to justify the telling of a lie in certain situations would count as feeling no shame around lying. In addition to showing that one is untrustworthy, a lack of shame around telling lies would severely hamper one's ability to learn the Dhamma. After all, as we noted in Chapter 2, truthfulness is one of the basic qualities that the Buddha looked for in a student, and it's absolutely necessary for examining one's actions for the sake of progress on the path. Divisive tale-bearing is the act of telling A about the misbehavior of B so as to win favor with A or to provoke a rift between A and B. Divisive tale-bearing also covers all sorts of speech intended to promote factionalism between individuals and groups of people. This type of wrong speech is sometimes translated as slander, but that's a mistranslation. Slander is a form of lying. Divisive tale-bearing is not. You simply report the unadorned facts of another person's behavior, and if the intention is to create a rift, it still counts as divisive tale-bearing. The Vinaya's discussion of its training rule against divisive tale-bearing shows that the intention is the crucial factor in determining whether the act of reporting A's misbehavior to B would come under the rule. In line with the discussion there, It would not count as wrong speech if you tell A about B's misbehavior for other reasons, as when A is responsible for B's behavior and can put a stop to it, or if someone, A or C, could be hurt by B's behavior. It's for this reason that the Buddha would criticize the teachings of contemporary teachers, although he was careful to mention those teachers by name only when speaking to his monks. When speaking to outsiders, he would criticize opposing teachings but without mentioning the teachers by name. Harsh speech is speech that is meant to be rough and repellent. And 10.165 describes it as words that are insolent, cutting, mean, or bitter to others, reviling others, provoking anger and destroying concentration. The Vinaya focuses on the cutting aspect of harsh speech with a rule against insults, which it defines as remarks based on the desire to jeer or to scoff at someone, or to make that person feel abashed. In its discussion of that rule, though, it recognizes that there can be times when a teacher or a parent has to use harsh language to get the attention of the person he or she is teaching. For this reason, it states that harsh or even insulting terms do not count as offenses when used for the purpose of conveying the Dhamma. The suttas and the Vinaya in general recognize this principle when they show the Buddha using strong words to criticize wayward students. In MN 22 and MN 38, for instance, two monks in his presence attribute pernicious views to him, and in response he calls them worthless men, a term that he also uses to address monks who act in ways that will inspire him to set forth a Vinaya rule. In CV Sespent 1, when Devadatta asks to take over the Sangha, the Buddha calls him a lickspittle, apparently to warn Devadatta that his desire will lead to his ruin, or to warn the monks in general that Devadatta has embarked on a seriously wrong course and so should not be followed. At times, the Buddha could also be cutting and satirical in his humor when it served the purpose of the Dhamma. In AN 591, for instance, he compares Brahmins with dogs, and the dogs come out on the better end of the comparison, in that dogs still observe some of the fine aspects of old Brahmanical traditions that many Brahmins have abandoned. In the past, Brahmin males mated only with Brahmin females and not with non-Brahmin females. At present, Brahmin males mate with Brahmin females and with non-Brahmin females. At present, male dogs mate only with female dogs and not with female non-dogs. This is the first ancient Brahmanical tradition that is now observed among dogs, but not among Brahmins. In the past, Brahmins did not make a stash of wealth, grain, silver, or gold. At present, Brahmins make stashes of wealth, grain, silver, and gold. At present, dogs do not make a stash of wealth, grain, silver, or gold. This is the fourth ancient Brahmanical tradition that is now observed among dogs, but not among Brahmins. The Buddha's rationale for this sort of speech is stated in MN 58, where he notes that he has a sense of time and place for when to use pleasing words and when to use displeasing words. To explain his motivation for using displeasing words, he cites the analogy of a young boy who gets a sharp object in his mouth. You have to do everything you can to remove the object, even if it requires drawing blood. Otherwise, the boy will swallow the object and suffer even greater harm. This analogy shows that, contrary to a common misunderstanding, people are not necessarily harmed by offensive speech or by having their feelings hurt. But because you harm yourself by speaking wrong speech, it's in your interest to be sure of your motivation and of the situation before using strong language or cutting humor with others. Idle chatter is defined as speaking out of season, what isn't based in fact, what isn't in accordance with the goal, the Dhamma, and the Vinaya, words that are not worth treasuring. Examples would include frivolous chatter and idle gossip. As the above example indicates, though, humorous speech does not come under idle chatter as long as it serves a useful purpose. Human behavior can be so absurd that the best humor is often that which simply states the facts of the case. The canon contains enough examples of the Buddha's sense of humor in exposing human foibles to show that humor can be an effective tool on the path. The Vinaya contains no training rule against idle chatter, although its narratives contain a list of topics that would count as idle chatter among monks, a list that is also found in the Suttas AN 1070. The list is interesting in covering everything from village gossip to topics that are currently studied in academic philosophy and science, such as speculations on the origin of the cosmos. Most of the list, though, is composed of topics such as politics, battles, women, heroes, food, and places that provide the standard fodder for the public media. In light of the fact that right speech should be timely, MN 136 provides a particularly interesting example of applying the Dhamma in an untimely way. Ven U Dayin tries to use the perception that all feelings are stressful to argue, in response to a question on the consequences of action, that all action results in stress. The Buddha, however, rebukes him for applying the wrong teaching to the question, showing that this type of speech also counts as idle chatter. This principle would then apply to any discussion of a point of Dhamma that is not appropriate to the question asked or the person asking it. In 10 Mir 165, in addition to listing forms of wrong speech to be avoided, also lists corresponding forms of right speech to be developed. Above and beyond avoiding lies, for example, one should be one who holds to the truth, is firm, reliable, no deceiver of the world. Beyond avoiding divisive speech, one should reconcile those who have broken apart or cement those who are united, love concord, delight in concord, enjoy concord, speak things that create concord. In addition to avoiding harsh speech, one should speak words that are soothing to the ear, that are affectionate, that go to the heart, that are polite, appealing and pleasing to people at large. In addition to avoiding idle chatter, one should speak words worth treasuring, timely, reasonable, circumscribed, connected with the goal. In this way, right speech is not just a matter of avoiding harmful speech, but is also a matter of engaging in speech that gives benefit all around. Right action. Right action is defined as abstaining from 3 types of wrong action: taking life, stealing, and sexual misconduct. Like the telling of lies, all of these types of wrong action have corresponding precepts in the 5 lay precepts, which means that they are to be absolutely avoided in all situations. Taking life means intentionally killing any animate being, human beings, animals, even insects. The Vinaya's discussion of its training rules against killing human beings and animals show that, to count as wrong action, the act of taking life would have to involve knowing that the being was a being and that your act would kill it. In other words, if you stepped on an ant, thinking that it was a spot of dirt, that would not count as taking life. The Vinaya also shows that, to qualify as an animate being, the being would have to be big enough to see with the naked eye. For this reason, intentionally killing bacteria would not count as wrong action. The motivation for killing, however, is not a mitigating factor here. This means that acts of euthanasia and putting animals out of their misery, even though motivated by a misguided sense of compassion, misguided in the sense that you don't really know what awaits the person or animal after death, would count as wrong action too. The firmness with which the Buddha regards the need to abstain from killing is illustrated in SN 171, where the question gives him the opportunity to allow for exceptions of any sort to the principle against killing, but he responds simply by saying that the one thing whose killing he condones is anger. Stealing means taking objects for one's own, in the manner of theft, knowing that they have an owner who has not given permission to take them. The Vinaya's discussion of its training rule against stealing shows that it does not cover borrowing with the intent to return, nor does it cover taking things from nature or the environment in general. The owner has to be a specific person or group of people, with person meaning human being or an inhabitant of the higher realms. Sexual misconduct is defined in the text from the man's point of view and covers having sexual intercourse with those who are protected by their families, i.e. minors, those protected by their Dhamma, i.e. those who have taken a vow of celibacy, those with husbands, those who entail punishments, i.e. members of a king's harem, and even those who are crowned with flowers by another man, i.e. those who are not formally married but who are going steady or in a committed relationship. From this list, it is possible to extrapolate similar standards for women. In one of the descriptions of the Noble Path, the phrase, abstaining from sexual misconduct is replaced with abstaining from sexual intercourse. None of the suttas explain this discrepancy, although as Sen 214 states, if you're incapable of celibate behavior, then at least don't transgress with the spouses of others. In other words, celibacy is ideal for the path. Sen 4.7 points out that in one who practices sexual intercourse, the teaching is muddled, but not so muddled that it prevents awakening, as witnessed by the large number of lay people who became arahants on listening to the Buddha's teachings. What is clear from these cases, though, is that awakening will not occur in the midst of sexual intercourse regardless of what later traditions claim. Guidance from right view. Right view provides guidance to right speech and right action on many levels. To begin with, it points to the importance of intention in determining the karmic consequences of your actions. This is why the definitions of wrong speech and wrong action apply only to acts done knowingly and deliberately. In describing the good and bad consequences of various actions, MN 135, right view also shows specifically why wrong speech and wrong action are wrong and why their right counterparts are right. It also warns of the synergy of bad karma. As AN 390 points out, if a person obsessed with gaining power wrongly inflicts punishments on others, he will then find it harder and harder to learn the truth, putting himself in a position where he removes himself further and further from the Dhamma. Right view, as we noted above, also teaches the principle that you harm others by getting them to engage in wrong conduct. For this reason, right speech and right action require that you not only refrain from wrong speech and wrong action yourself, but also that you refrain from getting others to engage in such behavior, and even from condoning them for engaging in it. So, for example, arguing that war can be morally justified, even if you don't participate in the killing yourself, would count as wrong action, as would a recommendation to others that, in times of poverty, they should steal from those who, in their eyes, are inappropriately wealthy. It's because of this principle against getting others to engage in wrong action that, even though abortion was legal in the Buddha's time, he forbade his monks and nuns from recommending abortion. The multi-lifetime perspective offered by right view, along with its explanation that the results of action sometimes take more than one lifetime to ripen, serves to remind you that even in times of difficulty and hardship, when it seems that holding to right speech and right action would put you at a disadvantage in terms of your wealth and survival, it's better to sacrifice your current well-being for the sake of long-term well-being. Especially during times of hardship, when you're threatened with death, it's important to be mindful of 3 passages from the canon. 1. The Buddha's statement in N5-130 that loss in terms of relatives, wealth, and disease do not lead to rebirth in the lower realms, but that loss in terms of view and virtue do. 2. His statement that you protect yourself by following right action and right speech, whereas if you steal and kill, you leave yourself unprotected. And 3. His statement that in observing the principles of right speech and right action in all situations, you give universal safety to others, at least from your quarter, and will ultimately share in that universal safety yourself. These reflections show why rebirth is such an important part of the working hypothesis provided by mundane right view. Without this multi-life perspective, it's all too easy to rationalize engaging in wrong speech and action if you feel that your survival depends on it. With this perspective, you can maintain your resolve to stick with right speech and right action all the way to the end of life. The values flowing from this perspective are particularly difficult to remember in times of verbal and physical conflict, which is why right view offers specific advice on how to maintain right action and right speech in such situations. In terms of action, it reminds you that victory over your own defilements is greater than victory over 1,000 others. Even if you are in a relative position of strength over your enemy, it's best to show restraint, which means that it's better to lose a battle if winning it entails engaging in wrong action. The Vinaya gives a specific example of this principle in allowing monks to strike back in self-defense when attacked, but not to do so with the intent to kill. In terms of verbal conflict, the Buddha encourages the monks not to get involved in useless debates, but his own behavior shows that, under certain conditions, debates can actually be helpful. This is why AN 3468 sets the conditions for which kinds of people are worth engaging in discussion. The conditions come down to two sorts. The other person, A, should know proper procedure in how to engage in a reasonable debate, and B, should have the integrity to conduct the debate in a fair manner. These conditions, of course, reflect back on you. If you're going to engage in a debate, you have to meet these conditions as well. If either side lacks the requisite conditions, it's better to walk away from the debate, even if other people regard that as a defeat. As in 368 points out, the purpose of discussion should be to lead to the mind's liberation. A discussion that does not serve that purpose is best avoided. In addition to debates, verbal conflict can also take the form of accusations of misbehavior. Here again, the canon offers advice to both sides, the accuser and the accused, as to what qualities they should bring to the accusation if it is to serve as an aid to both sides' liberation from defilement. Guidance for concentration and discernment. In addition to receiving guidance from the discernment factors of the path, right speech and right action also exercise qualities of mind that are conducive to developing the path factors that come under concentration and discernment. In terms of concentration, N11.22 mentions that following the principles of right speech and right action leads to lack of remorse, which in turn fosters two of the conditions needed for concentration. The first condition is mindfulness, the ability to keep something in mind. If you have nothing to regret in your words and deeds, you'll feel less need to block things from your memory. As a result, your mindfulness, and thus your concentration, will have fewer gaps. The second condition is gladness. Lack of remorse promotes the skillful gladness that allows the mind to settle down with a steady sense of well-being. Also, although the suttas don't mention this point, the practice of right speech in particular makes you more and more sensitive to the verbal fabrications, directed thought and evaluation that precede speech, at the same time giving you practice in how to control these fabrications so that your speech doesn't wander into ways that are wrong. The practice of applying the 3 tests for right speech to your own speech, that it be true, beneficial, and timely, prepares you for applying the same test to your thoughts as you try to bring the mind to concentration. In this way, right speech provides excellent preparation in exercising the sort of control over verbal fabrication that will be necessary to bring the mind into jhana. Gaining control over your mouth gives you practice in gaining control over the chatter in your mind. At the same time, the act of holding to right speech and right action helps to exercise the 3 qualities that have to function in right mindfulness: alertness, and ardency. To maintain right speech and right action at all times, you have to be mindful of, i.e., to hold in mind, the principles of what counts as right speech and right action. You have to be alert to make sure that your speech and actions are actually in line with those principles. And you have to be ardent in making the effort to stick with right speech and right action and to avoid their wrong counterparts. This is what MN 117 means when it says that right mindfulness and right effort, which is equivalent to ardency, circle around right speech and right action. This is also why SN 4716 notes that virtue is one of the requisites for right mindfulness. In addition to exercising the qualities of mind needed for concentration, the practice of right speech and right action also exercises your discernment. To begin with, it sensitizes you to your intentions in action. In this way, it takes the general principle of mundane right action, that actions are rooted in intention, and makes it more detailed and specific. You begin to see for yourself that honesty inside and out is necessary for genuine insight into your motives and intentions to arise. In a similar vein, it gives you exercise in learning how to develop the strategic wisdom needed to talk yourself into avoiding wrong speech and wrong action, even when you want to engage in such things, and to talk yourself into engaging in right speech and right action even when you don't want to. We will treat this issue in more detail under right effort, but it's important to realize that it's a matter of right view and right resolve as well. Third, the practice of right speech and right action also exercises your ingenuity in using discernment in the areas where the principles of right speech allow for exceptions, i.e., in the areas of divisive tale-bearing, harsh speech, and idle chatter, and in the areas such as the principle of truthfulness and all the areas of right action where no exceptions are allowed. In the areas where exceptions are allowed, you have to be honest with yourself about your motivations for taking advantage of the exceptions. For instance, with divisive tale-bearing, you have to know for sure that your motives are pure when telling A about B's misbehavior, and that it really will be in A's best interest to know. In the case of harsh speech, you have to discern your motivation clearly enough to be sure that your words are motivated, not by anger, but by the knowledge that harsh speech will be timely and effective in that particular case. In the areas where no exceptions are allowed, you have to know how to minimize the immediate harm that may come from holding firmly to the principles of right speech and right action. SN 41.3 gives an interesting illustration of this point. Ven Isiddhata does not want to reveal his identity to Sita, for fear that Sita, on knowing that they are related, will give him preferential treatment that he has not offered to the more senior monks. This would damage his standing vis-a-vis the monastic community. So when Sita questions him about Isiddhata's whereabouts, he answers in a non-committal way so as not to reveal his true identity. Only when Sita presses him, and he cannot find a way to avoid answering the question, does he reveal who he is. By forcing you to be ingenious and quick-witted in holding to the principle of not misrepresenting the truth, the principles of right speech in this area are an excellent exercise in discernment in action, much more so than the discernment that tries to decide when it's all right to lie. The principles of right action, because they are also meant to be followed in all situations, Provide similar exercises in how to use your discernment in holding to your principles while at the same time doing the least immediate harm. Transcendent virtue. MN 78 provides a definition of the transcendent level for all the virtue factors of the path when it defines what it means to be beyond skillful habits. Habit, here, being a translation of the word sila, which can also mean virtue or precept. Instead of dropping the precepts, a person beyond skillful habits is virtuous, silavant, but is not made of virtue, silamaya. What this means is that on reaching this stage of the practice, which apparently follows the first stage of awakening, your behavior stays in line with the principles of right speech, right action, and right livelihood, but you do not define yourself around your virtue, and you neither exalt yourself for being virtuous, nor do you disparage others for not. In this way, you avoid the dangers that come from clinging to habits and practices, at the same time enjoying the benefits that come from skillful words and deeds. In addition, you gain practice in becoming familiar with a state of mind that does not think in terms of I or me, thus preparing yourself to think more consistently in the terms that characterize right view on the transcendent level. Some ancient commentators in non-Pali Indian Buddhist traditions maintain that because speech, action, and livelihood are not an issue when the mind is in meditation, the virtue factors of the path are not really involved as the mind approaches awakening. Thus, they argue that the path just prior to awakening has only 5 factors. However, they miss the fact that the transcendent levels of virtue are still present in the mind, and so the path factors at the threshold of awakening still number 8. Readings: Right Speech, Anguttara, Nikaya, and 10.165. And how is one made impure in 4 ways by verbal action? There is the case where a certain person engages in false speech. When he has been called to a town meeting, a group meeting, a gathering of his relatives, his guild, or of the royalty, i.e. a royal court proceeding, if he is asked as a witness, "Come and tell, good man, what you know." If he doesn't know, he says, "I know." If he does know, he says, "I don't know." If he hasn't seen, he says, "I have seen." If he has seen, he says, "I haven't seen." Thus he consciously tells lies for his own sake, for the sake of another, or for the sake of a certain reward. He engages in divisive speech. What he has heard here, he tells there to break those people apart from these people here. What he has heard there, he tells here to break these people apart from those people there. Thus breaking apart those who are united and stirring up strife between those who have broken apart. He loves factionalism, delights in factionalism, enjoys factionalism, speaks things that create factionalism. He engages in harsh speech. He speaks words that are insolent, cutting, mean to others, reviling others, provoking anger and destroying concentration. He engages in idle chatter. He speaks out of season, speaks what isn't factual, what isn't in accordance with the goal, the Dhamma and the Vinaya, words that are not worth treasuring. This is how one is made impure in 4 ways by verbal action. And how is one made pure in 4 ways by verbal action? There is the case where a certain person abandoning false speech abstains from false speech. When he has been called to a town meeting, a group meeting, a gathering of his relatives, his guild, or of the royalty, if he is asked as a witness, "Come and tell, good man, what you know." If he doesn't know, he says, "I don't know." If he does know, he says, "I know." If he hasn't seen, he says, "I haven't seen." If he has seen, he says, "I have seen." Thus he doesn't consciously tell a lie for his own sake, for the sake of another, or for the sake of any reward. Abandoning false speech, he abstains from false speech. He speaks the truth, holds to the truth, is firm, reliable, no deceiver of the world. Abandoning divisive speech, he abstains from divisive speech. What he has heard here, he doesn't tell there to break those people apart from these people here. What he has heard there, he doesn't tell here to break these people apart from those people there, thus reconciling those who have broken apart or cementing those who are united. He loves concord, delights in concord, enjoys concord, speaks things that create concord. Abandoning harsh speech, he abstains from harsh speech. He speaks words that are soothing to the ear, that are affectionate, that go to the heart, that are polite, appealing and pleasing to people at large. Abandoning idle chatter, he abstains from idle chatter. He speaks in season, speaks what is based in fact, what is in accordance with the goal, the Dhamma, and the Vinaya. He speaks words worth treasuring, timely, reasonable, circumscribed, connected with the goal. This is how one is made pure in 4 ways by verbal action. And Tenten 165. Anguttara Nikaya and 840. Telling lies, when indulged in, developed, and pursued, is something that leads to hell, leads to rebirth as a common animal, leads to the realm of the hungry ghosts. The slightest of all the results coming from telling lies is that when one becomes a human being, it leads to being falsely accused. Divisive speech, when indulged in, developed, and pursued, is something that leads to hell, leads to rebirth as a common animal, leads to the realm of the hungry ghosts. The slightest of all the results coming from divisive speech is that when one becomes a human being, it leads to the breaking of one's friendships. Harsh speech, when indulged in, developed, and pursued, is something that leads to hell, leads to rebirth as a common animal, leads to the realm of the hungry ghosts. The slightest of all the results coming from harsh speech is that when one becomes a human being, it leads to unappealing sounds. Idle chatter, when indulged in, developed, and pursued, is something that leads to hell, leads to rebirth as a common animal, leads to the realm of the hungry ghosts. The slightest of all the results coming from idle chatter is that when one becomes a human being, it leads to words that aren't worth taking to heart. And 840. Anguttara, Nikaya, and 4183. I have heard that on one occasion the Blessed One was staying near Rajagaha in the bamboo forest, the squirrel sanctuary. Then Vasakara the Brahmin, the minister to the king of Magadha, approached the Blessed One and, on arrival, exchanged courteous greetings with him. After an exchange of friendly greetings and courtesies, he sat to one side. As he was sitting there, he said to the Blessed One, "I am of the view, of the opinion, that when anyone speaks of what he has seen, saying, 'Thus have I seen,' there is no fault in that. When anyone speaks of what he has heard, saying, 'Thus have I heard,' there is no fault in that. When anyone speaks of what he has sensed, saying, 'Thus have I sensed,' there is no fault in that. When anyone speaks of what he has cognized, saying, 'Thus have I cognized,' there is no fault in that." The Blessed One responded, "I do not say, Brahman, that everything that has been seen should be spoken about. Nor do I say that everything that has been seen should not be spoken about. I do not say that everything that has been heard, everything that has been sensed, everything that has been cognized should be spoken about. Nor do I say that everything that has been cognized should not be spoken about. When, for one who speaks of what has been seen, unskillful dhammas increase and skillful dhammas decrease, then that sort of thing should not be spoken about. But when, for one who speaks of what has been seen, unskillful dhammas decrease and skillful dhammas increase, then that sort of thing should be spoken about. When, for one who speaks of what has been heard, what has been sensed, what has been cognized, unskillful dhammas increase and skillful dhammas decrease, then that sort of thing should not be spoken about. But when, For one who speaks of what has been cognized, unskillful Dhammas decrease and skillful Dhammas increase, then that sort of thing should be spoken about. Then Vasakara the Brahmin, delighting and rejoicing in the Blessed One's words, got up from his seat and left. And 183. Readings. Right action. Laying aside violence toward all living creatures, both the firm and unfirm in the world, one should not kill a living being, nor have it killed, nor condone killing by others. Then the disciple should avoid consciously taking what's not given, anything, anywhere, should not have it taken, nor condone its taking. He should avoid all taking of what's not given. The observant person should avoid uncelibate behavior, like a pit of glowing embers. But if he's incapable of celibate behavior, he should not transgress with the wife of another. Sin 2:14. Anguttara Nikaya in 10.176. And how is one made impure in 3 ways by bodily action? There is the case where a certain person takes life, is brutal, bloody-handed, devoted to killing and slaying, showing no mercy to living beings. He takes what is not given. He takes, in the manner of a thief, things in a village or a wilderness that belong to others and have not been given by them. He engages in sexual misconduct. He gets sexually involved with those who are protected by their mothers, their fathers, their brothers, their sisters, their relatives, or their Dhamma, those with husbands, those who entail punishments, or even those crowned with flowers by another man. This is how one is made impure in 3 ways by bodily action. And how is one made pure in 3 ways by bodily action? There is the case where a certain person, abandoning the taking of life, abstains from the taking of life. He dwells with his rod laid down, his knife laid down, scrupulous, merciful, compassionate for the welfare of all living beings. Abandoning the taking of what is not given, he abstains from taking what is not given. He does not take, in the manner of a thief, things in a village or a wilderness that belong to others and have not been given by them. Abandoning sexual misconduct, he abstains from sexual misconduct. He does not get sexually involved with those who are protected by their mothers, their fathers, their brothers, their sisters, their relatives, or their Dhamma, those with husbands, those who entail punishments, or even those crowned with flowers by another man. This is how one is made pure in 3 ways by bodily action. In 10.176. Samyutta Nikaya, SN 3/5. Those who engage in bodily misconduct, verbal misconduct, and mental misconduct leave themselves unprotected. Even though a squadron of elephant troops might protect them, a squadron of cavalry troops, a squadron of chariot troops, a squadron of infantry troops might protect them, still they leave themselves unprotected. Why is that? Because that's an external protection, not an internal one. Therefore, they leave themselves unprotected. But those who engage in good bodily conduct, good verbal conduct, and good mental conduct have themselves protected. Even though neither a squadron of elephant troops, a squadron of cavalry troops, a squadron of chariot troops, nor a squadron of infantry troops might protect them, still they have themselves protected. Why is that? Because that's an internal protection, not an external one. Therefore, they have themselves protected. SN 3:5.